everyone, welcome to this co-production of WION and VOA. I'm Susan Tehrani, live from New York. Let's dive into our first story, where the United States says that it needs to see, quote, fundamental changes before it resumes funding to the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. The U.S. and some 15 other donor countries suspended aid after Israel's allegations that the agency staff were involved in the October 7th Hamas terror attacks. VOA's senior diplomatic correspondent, Cindy Sain, reports.
As Israel continues to pound what it says are Hamas targets in Gaza, including this school run by the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, known as UNRWA, humanitarian aid to Palestinian civilians is more essential than ever. But the two largest donors to the UNRWA, the United States and Germany, have suspended their aid, along with 14 other donor countries. A document allegedly circulated by Israel said that 12 UNRWA employees took part in the deadly October 7th attack in which Hamas terrorists killed 1,200 people and took another 253 people captive in Gaza. UNRWA's communications director, Tamara Al-Farifai, responded.
We have 33,000 people. Most of them, all of them almost, are very hardworking, very committed. They have been in the agency for many years. And so it's extremely important for us to really have an independent investigation into these specific individual cases that Israel brought to our attention.
At the United Nations on Wednesday, U.S. envoy Linda Thomas-Greenfield had this to say.
I know that we need to see fundamental changes before we can resume providing funding directly to UNRWA. And as you know, we shouldn't let that cloud the great work that UNRWA does.
UNRWA warns that unless donor countries resume aid, it may have to suspend operations in Gaza by the end of this month. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that would be catastrophic.
UNRWA is the backbone of our humanitarian response in Gaza. I appeal to all member states to guarantee the continuity of UNRWA's life-saving work.
One expert said she believes the UN is doing what the United States and other donor countries have requested.
So the UN is taking all of the steps that one would expect, including firing people, investigating people. They are doing what is needed to make sure that the people who had anything to do with October 7th are no longer part of the organization. It still is the case that UNRWA is providing crucial life-saving aid when not a lot of people or humanitarian organizations can get into Gaza. This is absolutely essential. So to suspend funding is just an extreme position.
The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says roughly 27,000 people have died in the Israeli military operation against the U.S. designated terrorist group Hamas since October 7th. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Joining us with additional reporting is VOA's Jessica Stone. She's live from the White House. Good morning, Jessica. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that Israeli allegations against UNRWA staff have yet to be, quote, borne out, but they look very credible. Would the U.S. consider revoking the funding suspension?
They're certainly leaving the door open to do that, Susan, but it's not going to be something that happens very quickly, because Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, laid out the conditions of that of the investigation that the United States is looking for. She said we need to look at the organization, how it operates, how they manage their staff, and ensure that people who commit criminal acts, such as the 12 individuals, are held accountable immediately so that UNRWA can continue the essential work that it's doing. That statement coming from the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations earlier this week, who was quoted in Cindy Sain's piece, but clearly these steps and this investigation is not going to happen overnight that the U.S. is calling for.
And about those drones that killed 3 U.S. service members in Jordan, what have we learned about how the attack took place? And do we know anything further about how President Biden plans on retaliating?
Yeah, so it's the first deadly strike against U.S. forces since the war in Gaza began in October, and an escalation certainly around the region of the conflict that's going on in Gaza. The Pentagon blames the attack on an Iran-backed military group, a U.S. official telling VOA earlier this week that there was confusion over who sent the drone, because at the very same time as the drone that came and eventually killed those troops came into the base or near the base, there was already a plan for a U.S. drone to be returning, and there was some confusion over which drone this was, and that's pretty much what U.S. officials are saying on background caused the deaths of those 3 U.S. troops. As to what President Biden plans to do to respond to the attack, well, he has said unequivocally that he has decided on a response, but there's very little reporting aside from CBS News' reporting that there will be a bunch of counterattacks on Iranian assets in Iraq and Syria. That reporting not yet matched by any other outlets, and so we don't know the precise nature of the response, but we do anticipate that it would be significant and hopefully viewed as a deterrent by Iran in this escalating tit-for-tat that we're seeing in the region. Susan?
Yeah, absolutely. Jessica, please do stay with me. We're going to go to your report about a backdoor for Chinese nationals into U.S. territory and then talk to you after that. The Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, CNMI, a U.S. territory in the Pacific, is in the United States where the Chinese nationals can enter without a visa for up to 14 days. Now, some in Congress want to shut that program down. VOA's Jessica Stone reports.
The Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, or CNMI. It's a collection of islands in the Pacific Ocean, a U.S. territory that is far removed from Washington, D.C. Since 2019, the CNMI has offered Chinese nationals 14-day visa-free entry to help encourage tourism. CNMI Governor Arnold Palacios tells VOA the program made China a lucrative source of visitors.
Pre-pandemic, it was close to 45 to 48% of tourists that come to the Commonwealth are from mainland China. 185,000 people.
But Republican Representative Neil Dunn says the program opened a back door to Chinese citizens who are working on the islands illegally, selling drugs, or perhaps gathering intelligence on U.S. strategic military installations in the region.
It was an honest thing to try, but it becomes a loophole that the Chinese take advantage of.
In a letter to the Department of Homeland Security last year, Dunn and 31 other Republicans in Congress called for closing that loophole, demanding that Chinese nationals obtain a tourism visa to visit the islands. DHS did not respond to an email from VOA seeking a response to the letter. In addition to the visa issue, Palacios says he's also dealing with illegal entry into the region. In September, more than a dozen Chinese nationals were prosecuted for illegally trying to enter Guam by chartering a boat from the CNMI island of Saipan.
That's where Anderson Air Force Base is. And so, yeah, there's reason to be concerned, obviously.
In January, Palacios came to Washington calling on the Homeland Security Department to tighten the vetting process for Chinese visitors. The department has proposed additional electronic screening, but still allows Chinese nationals to enter the CNMI for 2 weeks without a visa. The changes would begin later this year. Congressman Dunn says the proposal doesn't go far enough.
You can't do that. You can't allow anybody into an American territory without a visa, preferentially just because you want tourist business.
Palacios took office promising to reduce dependence on Chinese investment. He's trying to cultivate tourism from U.S. allies like Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. He says the territory lost as much as $1 billion when Chinese lockdowns prevented travelers from coming to Saipan.
We've had to make drastic sacrifices in government operations and public services.
Palacios says he's asking Washington lawmakers to increase air routes to the territory and to stop illegal entry. He wants money to employ more locals to protect the homeland by sea and air. Jessica Stone, VOA News, Washington.
VOA's Jessica Stone is still live with us from Washington, D.C. Fascinating report, Jessica. What does the governor of the Northern Mariana Islands want to see happen with this visa program?
Well, he's got two pressure points, right? Because the entire tourism industry in CNMI is really dependent, especially on Chinese tourism. So he's getting pressure there. And he's trying to give this intermediary proposal by the Homeland Security Department an opportunity. He's trying to vet it, look through it, give it a chance. But ultimately, there is this reality that it is not as strict as a tourism visa process would be. And so he's open to that as well. In the meantime, he is trying to drum up more tourism from South Korea, from Japan, from other parts of the Indo-Pacific, from South Asia, from other parts of East Asia, because this is a critical need for all of these Pacific islands. They need to diversify their economies away from China and to other like-minded partners, to give them options so that they're not just dependent on their, on one source of revenue for their economy. So that's a key agenda for this governor. Susan?
And this week, the FBI warned of an additional threat against the U.S. from China on American civilian infrastructures. Can you talk about that for us?
Yeah, so the FBI director was on the Hill earlier this week testifying before Congress, and he told Congress that Beijing is targeting public infrastructure. That means critical oil pipelines, the power grid, water systems. And he said that, of course, that he expects China to persist in that effort, adding that the attacks could hinder any U.S. military response in the event of a Taiwan contingency. We should note here that Beijing denies these allegations, but part of the testimony of the FBI director centered around an existing revealed hacking operation that was that the U.S. has linked to China concerning this public infrastructure. There are also concerns that the FBI director expressed about Chinese interference in the U.S. election. There have been some reports that President Xi Jinping promised President Biden that he would not interfere in the U.S. election during the recent meeting in San Francisco. We have yet to corroborate those claims. A National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, though, saying publicly this week that it would be unlikely for China to do so, but it might be more likely for China, he believes, to do so in a congressional election as opposed to a presidential election, especially a congressional candidate that is perceived to be tough on China. All of this comes as the FBI indicted 4 Chinese citizens for smuggling U.S. origin electronic parts to Iran, which violates sanctions. So an active week here in U.S.-China relations. Susan?
All right. Well, thank you so much for all of that. Always great to talk to you. Jessica Stone joining us live from the White House this Friday. Talk to you soon.